Welcome to There's a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell. I'm an exercise physiologist and a personal trainer. I own Maxwell's Fitness Programs, and I've been in business since 1994. Today's podcast is going to be some fun, and it is a topic very close to my heart because I think it's the root of what we need to understand with strength training. So I'm going to go over joint actions, and no, joint actions aren't something you smoke. All right. Let me thank Jonathan and Lyn Gildon of the Gildon Group at Realty Pros. They currently have over 285-star reviews on Zillow, and they list all over Volusia County, Port Orange, Daytona Beach, Ormond, wherever you are, there they are. I will put their information in the show notes for you if you're looking for the absolute best real estate agents in our area. All right, so joint actions aren't something you smoke. All right, so, as my listeners understand, I've been using kind of funny titles, and, you might think it's corny and everything, but you know what? I analyze the data on the podcast because my goal is to spread the fitness message all over the place. And it's pretty cool when I look at other countries that somehow, some way are downloading the podcast. And that's pretty neat. So the word is spreading. And when I look at the data, some of my outlandish titles are downloaded the most. Number one over this past year was Fat, Drunk, and Stupid is no way to go through life. That is number one. That is pretty wild to me. I mean, it was a good podcast because obviously by now, or hopefully obviously, that the message had nothing to do with that really. So, but today, at least two of the words have something to do with today's topic, joint actions. All right, that absolutely has something to do with it. And I want to explain what these are, so you really understand the method to the madness of strength training. Because if you understand joint actions, you understand how to exercise your body. It is key. I remember when I was teaching sports medicine, and one of the things that in almost every class I taught, except for maybe the two that had to do with sports psychology and business, I would go over joint actions. So the other 6 classes, because I taught 8, I would go over joint actions because they're just so critical. They're just so necessary for students to learn and for us to learn and for trainers to learn, and anybody that is responsible for working with people in physical therapy or personal training or anything regarding any form of strength training really need to know that inside and out. More than anything, they need to know that. And I remember once after one of the lessons, one of the students said to me, either during class or after, I can't really remember, but he said, now that I know these joint actions, I pretty much can strength train anywhere using anything. I said, man, you got it. And I felt proud with that because that really is the key. All right. So let's dive in and learn what these things are. So there are muscle actions and there are joint actions. Muscle actions are things like concentric and eccentric and isometric. So that's the actions of the muscle fibers themselves. Joint actions are how these muscles move the joints, because that is the role of muscles, which is to move the joint, articulate the joint. That is what muscles do. All right. So when we are looking at each joint in the body, we have to know that there are 1 or 2 or possibly 3 muscles that move that joint. And once we understand that, we will know how to strengthen each and every one of our joints. I go on rants often about the influencers on social media, especially Instagram. I think Instagram, my opinion on social media is it's the most benign. It's the most, friendly place as far as if you don't want to get attacked politically or get into a rabbit's hole that is completely unproductive. Instagram is by far, I think, the best on that. But the one downfall it does have is that there's a lot of fitness influencers on there. And obviously, right? I mean, it's a place to show videos and photos for the most part. And most of these people I see, they have gorgeous bodies. They have great bodies, men and women. They're absolutely extremely fit and should be very happy with that. My problem with it is they don't always know, and I think I've shared this statistic with you before, that over 60% of fitness influencers don't have the right training and education to be telling you what to do. They just know what works for them, maybe, or they might not even know that, but they know how to do certain things that look cool and challenging, and they show that to the public, and then the public then thinks that they need to do a specific exercise, when in reality, the science says it's a lot more simple than that. We just simply have to know that muscles pull on joints. So muscles always pull on tendons, and tendons are connected to the actual joint articulation, and it pulls the bone. All right. So the tendon is attached to the muscle and the bone, and the muscle always pulls, never pushes, always pulls on the tendon. The tendon is connected to the bone, and the tendon pulls the bone in the direction that it wants it to go. All right. So as I said, every joint articulation and bone has at least one, sometimes 2, 3, even 4 in the case of the rhomboids, muscles that actually pull on that bone. If we learn what muscles pull on what bone, thus articulating that joint, and articulating means moving, that joint for isolation exercises and multi-joint exercises, we will simply know very, very clear what exercises to choose. So let's look at a few. The knee. The knee is an area that's vulnerable for me. It's an area I've had to rehab on myself a couple times from overuse injuries. It's a joint that I work with others on very often. My first sponsor, Mr. Gildon, Jonathan Gildon, that's how we basically got hooked up. Is he heard me speak at a Rotary Club, and he heard how I really specialize in these types of things, meaning medical conditions, special populations, injuries, illnesses, whatever. And he liked what I had to say, and he had met me before, but he pulled me aside and we started talking about his knee. And I told him, I said, well, it's pretty simple, actually. So he was finishing up some physical therapy at the time, and he said when he'd finish, he'd hook up with me. And he did. Maybe it was a month later. And, the physical therapy didn't work real well, and oftentimes they don't. It's not really the PT's fault, but the industry itself is kind of like run by the insurance companies that tell them what to do. And I won't go on that rant, but the bottom line is he wasn't fully rehabilitated. So we started on a program that I know works, and lo and behold, he does not have knee issues anymore. He's run some 5Ks. He ran the Easter Beach Run. He's back to surfing. And that's simply because I understand the muscles, I understand the joint actions, and I understand the joints. I understand the bones. I understand the tendons. I understand the ligaments. I understand all that stuff. And a trainer should understand these things. We're working with muscles all day long. We should know what they do, right? We should know the body inside and out. Thankfully, I do. Ellen does. It's important. So anyway, let's take the knee. The knee is a vulnerable area. It's also a strong area because it's really protected by many things. So the knee has 4 different ligaments: the anterior cruciate ligament, posterior cruciate ligament, the lateral ligament, and the medial ligament, MCL. So that's 4 ligaments. It's got 2 major tendons connecting to it. It's got the quad tendon, and it has the patella tendon. That right there. Then it has meniscus on the side, lateral meniscus and medial meniscus on the side. And it has anterior cartilage underneath the kneecap. And It's surrounded by two of the largest muscles in the whole body. There's actually three muscles that surround it, but two of the largest, which is the quad and hamstrings. And then below it, you have the gastrocnemius, the calf. So the knee is actually very stable, but the knee also takes a ton of abuse, right? It just does. We bend, we walk, we run, we sprint, we pivot, we do these things. So the knee is vulnerable even though it's strong. But because I just mentioned all of this tissue around it, we can make it stronger if we understand the joint actions. All right. So the knee, again, hamstrings and quad are the main muscles attached to the knee. So if we want to get the knee stronger, because remember what I said, muscles are attached to the bone via tendons, and studies show that tendons get stronger in hypertrophy. So we can work the knee all the way to the bone, literally, if we know the exercises to choose. So the quadriceps are on the anterior portion of the body, right? Superior to the kneecap, which means above, and they are responsible for knee extension. So that's the joint action, knee extension. So that's like, and I did my little, matching tests for my muscle groups and my joint actions for my sports med students, which I love to do. I used to love to see when I listed all of them and they nailed it. I'm like, yep, got them all. So that's what that would be. It would say quads. What's the joint action? Knee extension. So that means you're extending your foot, right? You're moving your tibia and fibula forward. That's what it does. And then the knee flexes. So you got an agonist, the quads. You have your antagonist, the hamstrings. So the hamstring flexes the knee, which means pulls the knee behind you. All right. That's done by the hamstring. So the joint action for the hamstrings is called knee flexion. You always say the joint first, and then you say it's anatomical movement, flexion, knee flexion, done by the hamstrings. If you really want to be fancy, you can break down the hamstrings and say semimembranous, semitendinosus, and biceps femoris, long head, and short head. There you go. So there's actually four muscles to the hamstrings. There's four muscles to the quads: rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and vastus intermedialis. So all of those muscles are responsible for knee extension. All of the hamstring muscles are responsible for knee flexion. All right. So first things first, when I'm rehabbing a knee, we have to isolate those muscles. It drives me crazy on social media when I see these people doing these ridiculous like kettlebell exercises where somebody's getting up from the floor and they're saying, oh, this is such a functional exercise. I'm making my knees stronger. And I'm going, you're an idiot. I mean, that looks cool and it looks challenging and it looks hard. And you know what? Jumping off a cliff and landing on my feet looks hard too, but I'm not going to do it. So, the point is what are we really trying to do? What is the method to the madness? We're trying to strengthen the knee, dummy. So we want to make sure that we're strengthening the quads and strengthening the hamstrings. And we do that by doing isolation exercises like a knee extension, a leg extension, and a leg curl. And rarely do you see these social media icons sitting on a boring old leg extension doing quad extensions, or laying or seated on a leg curl doing leg curl. No, it's not cool enough, right? Even though those are two of the most effective exercises you could ever do to strengthen your knees. Plain and simple. I mean, it's not rocket science, all right? Then after that, and again, I'm just using the knee as an example, then we want to take it to, this is like the method to the madness of rehabilitation. So then we want to take it to a multi-joint exercise because, we're not walking around doing leg extension on a machine and leg curl all day long. We actually have to put our foot to the ground and do what is called a closed chain. So the heel must hit the ground. We have to prove that the knee can extend and flex without pain while the foot is on the ground. So we have to do a compound exercise, and the compound exercise is a squat because the squat mobilizes the knee. So now the squat works the hamstrings, it works the quads, and then it also works the glutes. So now you are training those muscles in what we call a multi-joint exercise. But it's just using 3 different joint actions. That's what a squat is. And it's so funny when people say, well, I don't really do squats, I do leg presses. And I'm like, shake my head going, leg press is a machine version of a squat because it all comes back to joint actions. So the joint actions for a squat is knee extension, working the quads, knee flexion, working the hamstrings, and hip extension, working the glute maximus. Guess what? Same joint actions on the leg press. It's just you're using a man-made machine versus your own body holding a load. Which is better? They're both great. Use either of them, but do the movements. It's key for rehabilitation. All right? Let me take another one. Let's look at the classic old Popeye muscles, the old biceps, right? And it's actually called the bicep brachii, because what a lot of people don't realize is on the anterior portion of the arm, you have the bicep brachii, which flexes the muscle, the biceps, and also supinates the wrist. But then there's this little muscle next to the bicep. It's still anterior, and it's called the brachialis. And the brachialis flexes the elbow, but it doesn't supinate the wrist. So when you're doing hammer curls, you're working more of the brachialis. When you're doing alternating dumbbell curls, you're working more of the bicep brachii. All right? So again, joint actions. But the point is that's what the biceps and the brachialis do. They flex the elbow and they move the radius and the ulna bones. So the biceps are attached to the radius and ulna via the tendon. All right, the tendons hold them in place. Again, so remember, muscles pull on tendons and tendons move bones. Articulate the joint of the elbow. So the biceps brachii and brachialis, its joint actions is elbow flexion, and with the bicep brachii, you add wrist supination. So it turns your thumb outward. All right. So I'm really hammering home this muscle, and this is actually a fairly easy muscle to know because it's got, one function essentially. Because you will hear these people say, well, I'm going to do preacher curls to work this part of the bicep. I'm going to do standing barbell curls to work this part of the bicep. I'm going to do laying back incline curls and work this part of the bicep. And everybody that's ever studied anatomy, physiology, and, there's physics involved here. So joint actions are mostly physics, but, they're going to look at you and shake their head and go, so the biceps brachii and brachialis flex the elbow. That's what they do. And it really doesn't give two hoots what position you're in, because we also know in physiology there's such a thing called the all or none principle. And that means if a cell is going to fire, it's going to fire all the way. And if you go to failure, that means you have fired every single one of the muscle fibers that make up the motor units, which make up your belly of your muscle. So if you went to failure, you have worked every single fiber in your biceps, in your bicep brachii and your brachialis. So what was that about the movements? Now, nothing wrong with adding variety. Nothing wrong with figuring out which one works best for you. Because as I talk about a lot, if it's burning, it's working. If you're feeling it, great. Because sometimes if we have weaker shoulders, then certain bicep exercises will impact the shoulder. Sorry, let me repeat that. So if you have like a weaker shoulder or even a shoulder injury, if you're doing standing barbell curls, you may find that your bicep work is being limited by the pain in your deltoid. So it would make sense that you might sit down with dumbbell curls or maybe do a machine or a preacher curl, which totally takes your shoulders out of it to do. So Rob didn't say don't do variety. That's ridiculous. I use variety all the time, but I understand I use variety for the right reasons, which means change, which means boredom, which means that's all I have today. but I don't need to work every freaking single angle of a muscle to work the muscle. That just tells me that you have no concept of physics or physiology, and you have no concept what joint actions are. All right? So I don't want you to smoke these joint actions. I want you to learn these joint actions. All right? And just in case you want to know, I'm just going to list them for you because it's fun. And then we will wrap this up. So again, I'm going to go from largest to smallest. The big glute maximus does hip extension. That means it pushes your femur. Ooh, I said the wrong word. It pulls your femur forward. All right. I already said the quads do knee extension. The hamstrings do knee flexion. The gastrocnemius, which is the superficial muscle of the calves, because there's two, does plantar flexion. That means it pushes you up on your toes, pulls you up on your toes. The soleus is beneath the old gastrocnemius, and as you hear Ellen say a lot, it's the second heart because it's also responsible for pumping blood back to the heart. It does plantar flexion as well, but it does it in the seated position when your knees are bent at 90 degrees. All right, bet you didn't know that. All right, your pectoralis major does horizontal shoulder adduction. That means it pulls your humerus towards your body. Think about a dumbbell fly. Your latissimus dorsi has two joint actions. Actually, it has shoulder adduction. So if your hands are held up overhead, it brings your upper arm down to the side. Think pull up. It also does shoulder extension. So if your hands are in front of you, think chin up and pulling your chin over a bar or pulling a bar down to your chin. That obviously has help with the biceps, but that is called shoulder extension. That's what your lats do. Your rhomboids are huge muscles that do scapular retraction. So it takes your scapula, which is a true joint. A lot of people don't understand that. They just think it's a shoulder blade and a bone, but it's a true joint. It actually comprises and pulls your scapular together, which is a very, very important movement for upper back health. Your deltoids have three joint actions. Your medial deltoids have shoulder abduction, think side raise, shoulder flexion, think front raise, and horizontal shoulder abduction, think reverse fly. So take a fly, flip you upside down, think that motion. Your biceps, as I already said, your bicep brachii does elbow flexion and wrist supination. Your brachialis does elbow flexion. Your triceps, which has three muscles, three different heads, medial head, long head, short head, does elbow extension and wrist pronation. A lot of people don't know that part, so it actually rolls your thumb down. All right? Think tricep press down, overhead tricep extension. Your rectus abdominals, that's the muscles you think of when you do a crunch, does spinal flexion. All right. Your transverse abdominals, think plank. Those are called isolateral abs, meaning they hold your spine in place. They aren't intended for movement. Your spinal erectors, think low back machine, does spinal extension. I would argue it's the most neglected muscle in your body. All right. Your internal and external obliques have two different actions. They have spinal rotation and lateral spinal flexion. All right. You probably didn't write all these down, and there are more. There's a few more, but those are the major. But that's okay. I just want you to understand that there are joint actions. There is a method to the madness. And when we're choosing exercises, that takes precedent. I mean, we have to train every muscle in the body, and we do that by training every joint and understanding what muscles move each joint. So when we know that, strength training programming becomes pretty simple. All right. That was a fun one for me. And now I want to thank Daytona Beach Overhead Door. Jeff and Zach Hawk are the owners, father and son team. Great people. I want to announce that they are sponsoring the MaxFit Games again, as our other sponsors are, Jonathan and Lyn Gildon. And Overhead Doors, they're the best around. I mean, they have the best customer service. They have the best garage doors. Yeah, you know the logo, you know the label. They're the best because they're the best. So if you need any help or need to switch out your doors, check them out. I will put their information in the show notes. Give Mr. Zach Hawk a call. All right. Be Max Fit, be Maxwell.